Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you had a good week. How's everyone doing?
Pretty good. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca. It's going pretty good.
Great, great. Well, happy Monday. It was a crazy Monday in my house. So, anyway, happy to be with all of you. So we're going to go through HR strategic planning and through talent acquisition tonight. And I will send you the answer sheet to the quiz, the HR competency quiz that you took last week, as well as some other quizzes for you to take, including some others around HR competency, so you can practice that one and strategic planning and talent acquisition all in one. But we're going to start with HR strategic planning. Before we go into that module, were there any questions that came up for you all as you were studying?
I had one, but
Tiana, you had one?
I had questions, but there's just so much. Honestly, I don't think it'd be best I bring it up now. I think what I'll do is just write an email to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's fine. And if we can welcome Heidi. I see Heidi on the call. She's going to be joining us from this session on. So welcome Heidi. We're glad to have you. All right, so let's talk about HR strategic planning. Strategy is the long-range plan to achieve defined goals, and it's created through a strategic planning process. And we'll talk about both the strategic planning process and then how it's implemented with strategic management. And then we'll talk about some ways that you can tell if the strategy is the right strategy for your organization. But strategy can be carefully articulated, planned for future actions, or it can be more emergent. So you may come up with a strategy in response to some type of external condition that exists. We're going to focus more on the deliberate nature of strategy rather than those that are more emergent. And strategy has 4 steps, and these 4 steps are things that you will see on the exam. They are formulation, development, implementation, and evaluation. Formulation, when you're in this stage, leaders and anyone who's involved with the strategy gather and analyze internal and external information to determine the organization's position, your capabilities, what constraints might exist, and what opportunities there are. And then they use that to develop, in the development stage, goals and tactics to optimize success. Then in implementation, what you're working on really is trying to get the strategy working in a way that it will be successful. And finally, you evaluate the results. Was the strategy a success? And what do we need to do differently? And you'll notice that this isn't a linear process because it happens over and over again as you have different things that happen in your organization, or if there's, for some reason, there's something new, maybe you have a new market, a new product that you have to market, so you have a new strategy. Mm-hmm. There are 3 factors that differentiate successful strategy implementation from unsuccessful. Is there alignment of effort? Meaning, did every function align its goals and activities to fit the strategy, or are we all doing exactly what we always have done in the past? Alignment of effort for HR means that we create our goals that focus on our activities on things that move the organization forward towards meeting its goals, not on the activities that don't relate to the strategy. So if you think about your HR practices or your HR departments, are they working on things that are related to the strategy of the overall organization, or are they just doing the same things that they've always done? And that's a question, if you're in HR, to really ask yourself, why are we doing this particular activity? What's the benefit of it for the organization? We might think that an activity is critical, but if it doesn't align to the organization's strategy, it might not need to be done right now, or it might need to be tabled. The next one is called control of drift. And this is about, did the organization make the necessary course corrections to be able to stay focused on the end goal, or are we going back to the ways of the past? Drift is described when an organization fails to respond to changes in its environment that lead to shifting the strategy slightly. It's often caused by organizations that are too deeply rooted in the past. So maybe you have a strategy to do something different, but because you've always done the same processes and people aren't willing to change those processes, you might drift back away from the strategy back to what you've done in the past. And the third critical success factor for strategy is around core competencies. Do the strategies focus on core competencies? Successful organizations know what they're good at and they focus on those things. HR has a key role in the strategy process. We should be consulting and advising on workforce resources, on deficits that will impact the strategy. We need to be the one that help build and maintain the talent pools and manage labor supplies. We likely will be one that we build and sustain performance management processes, and we work to acquire new talent. We are doing all of these things throughout the cycle, but it starts during the formulation stage, when key value of HR is to make sure that we have the right talent pools in place to get the right people who can work on the strategy. In HR, we have to analyze strategy with many different stakeholders. So here are some of them that we are responsible for in our organizations. Our internal customers for sure, but we might have to deal when we're trying to formulate strategy with suppliers, meaning vendors who are going to help us get that strategy done. Maybe if you're not part of a government agency, which some of you are, you might have to work with some government agencies or other institutions or communities. So let's start, we'll talk about all four of these. The first is the formulation. So the planning process starts with the information gathering, which is in the formulation stage. And formulation is key steps for us to understand what are the threats and opportunities that might be present for us to be able to get this strategy done. It uses what we call systems thinking to understand how the organization operates. And that basically states that the organizations are composed of interacting and interdependent parts. So each part is different by the role it's played, but we have to pay attention to how the parts are working together to figure out a strategy will work. So changes in one part might affect the other. So if you're formulating the strategy, what you're starting to do is figuring out, do we have the right people in place to do what we want to do? Do we have what threats are in our way to get that strategy done? And what is our current makeup look like in terms of our ability to get what we want to get done? And you can do that by focusing on what's called an environmental scan. An environmental scan, which by the way is always on the exam, and we'll talk about these four in just a minute, but environmental scans are ways to systematically gather information about threats and opportunities to strengthen your strategic plan. And you're gathering information both internally and externally. There are four examples of environmental scans that you see on the bottom. The two on the left are two that you will see often in both the exam and your organizations. I guarantee they do these, and you may or may not know that it's happening, but they're happening behind the scenes with strategic planning. The first is called PESTLE. And a PESTLE analysis is an environmental scan where you look to identify what environmental forces exist that might get in the way of you being able to do whatever strategy you want to do. When we talk about forces, we're talking about things that are propelling us towards meeting the strategy or things that are getting in the way and blocking the strategy. So in a PESTLE analysis, what we do is we analyze all 6 of these areas to see what possible events or trends might exist that could help or hinder our strategy implementation. So let's just kind of play this out as we walk through it. Let's assume that we manufacture athletic shoes. So we sell athletic shoes and we want to do business in South Africa. What might we think about with each of these categories? Let's start with political and work our way down. If we're thinking about doing business in South Africa and we sell athletic shoes, when we're thinking about political, what we need to think about are things like, are there issues with government or stability or corruption in the government that might get in the way of us being able to come in and do our business in that country? Are they willing to let companies from outside of their country come in? That's what politics is about. Is it stable enough in that in that country for us to come in? Or because of maybe political instability, we wouldn't be able to hire enough workers, or what could the political instability do to our ability to come into that country?
I'm sorry, what did you say about economic?
I'm not on economic yet, I'm still on political.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay, I'm going to economic right now.
Okay.
So economic would be What about the prices for materials? How much will it cost for us to get the material that we need to make our shoes? So if we're making athletic shoes and we know that rubber is very hard to get in that environment, or other whatever supplies we need, then maybe we wouldn't want to take our strategy to South Africa. Sorry, go ahead, Gianna.
I had a question, but I'm going to wait until I finish the pestle. It's about the environmental scanning.
Okay, all right. The other thing about economic is to think about the income of the consumers in that country. So you're talking about both the prices of materials, or the prices, which would be an economic scan, but also the income. Are they able to afford the shoes that we want to buy, what we want to sell there? Social can be things like education, skills, values, lifestyles, and purchasing habits. In South Africa, we might want to do a scan to find out, are our shoes something that the market is looking for? Would we have a demand? And that would be in the social side. T is around technology. What kind of technology needs would we have, and would we have available to us? What do we need, and what is available to us to be able to manufacture our shoes? That would be the technology. L would be legal. Are there employment laws in South Africa that we need to be aware of? And in fact, there are. So if we were looking to sell our shoes in South Africa and manufacture there, could we have people from outside of South Africa come in? Or would there be labor laws that prohibit that? And finally, environmental. Are there environmental regulations, maybe there are water or air quality issues that we have to be aware of that might stop us from wanting to do business in South Africa? And so pestle analysis really is just a scan of the environment that tells us, yep, our strategy could work well here, or these are the type of things that we need to be aware of, because if we do it, this is the hurdles that we need to overcome. Tiana, you had a question about an environmental scan. What was that?
I had done some study. I started studying on strategy and the SWOT analysis and environmental scanning. And what I was confused about is I always thought environmental scanning was external. It was just looking at the opportunities and threats, not internal. But from just when we were starting to read it, I saw you mention that it's internal as well.
That's right. So this particular one, so pestle is primarily external, but when we talk about SWOT in just a second, I'll tell you the parts that are internal and the parts that are external, because it's actually
okay.
both. Yeah.
Okay.
So any questions about pestle and how you might do that?
How you might do. I think you run a number of research, I mean, it's research basically that you'd have to do for the organization before it's analysis. You'd have to go over and do research. I don't know if focus groups would be relevant towards it to get the required data that you need.
No, you're right. You're right. It's absolute research that you'd have to do, definitely. So pestle process is similar to risk management assessment. And if you're familiar with that, which basically says you have to assemble a list of events that you can materialize. What are the positive and negative short and long-term implications? Then you do have to research the impacts and assess the importance. So you might talk to people to do some of those things. Like you might be able to find out from the political environment from talking to people in terms of a focus group. But environmental, technological needs, legal needs, that's going to require you to do some research. Pestle is almost always on the exam if you're taking the exam. And the thing to know about it is the questions that they will ask will say something like, if we were doing an environmental scan and you were looking at the financial implications of doing your strategy, which part of pestle would that be? And if it's financial, it's going to be economic. So just think about what the question is and how it relates to that pestle. Just know what what pestle's acronym stands for. The next environmental scan is one that is both internal and external. And so a SWOT analysis, who has done a SWOT analysis before?
I've done several.
Okay, Mary, great. So Mary, can you explain the difference between internal and external on SWOT?
So yeah,
internal,
pardon me?
You can say no, you don't want to do it, by the way.
No, I'll take a shot at it. So internal is strengths within your organization, right? So the strength of your leaders, maybe knowledge that you have, experience that you have, and then external is from outside the organization. So maybe knowledge or that your competitors may have, or pricing maybe that would beat your pricing. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So think about it this way: both the strengths and the opportunities, which are both positive things, and then weaknesses and threats are both could be challenging or negative things. And for each of the positive and each of the negative, one's internal and one's external. So strengths and weaknesses are both internal facing. You're looking at the internal strengths of your organization and the internal weaknesses of your organization. And then opportunities and threats are both external facing. What opportunities exist in the market? Maybe there's no athletic shoe in South Africa, so that's an opportunity. What threats are there in the market? Well, maybe there's a shortage of workers, so that's a threat in that. That's an external threat. So for a SWOT analysis, 2 are internal, strengths and weaknesses, and 2 are external, opportunities and threats. And just like the other environmental scan, PESTEL, that we were talking about, this is a scan to say, a review to say, does it make sense for us to do this strategy? Based on what we know about SWOT, does it make sense? And if we use that same athletic shoe manufacturer, which of the following information falls into what category? If we were named the best athletic shoe by Consumer Reports, would that be a strength, a weakness, an opportunity, or a threat? If our company was named the best athletic shoe.
I'd say it's both a strength and an opportunity.
It's definitely a strength. Tell me why it's an opportunity.
Because if you're named the best athletic shoe by Consumer Reports, I take that and market it. That way you get more customers.
Hey,
That's
great.
a brand opportunity.
It could be a brand opportunity. So it's absolutely a strength because it focuses internal on us. But if you then use it towards your marketing, I'll agree with you that it could be something that's an opportunity. What about this one? Let's say that we had declining sales in the last 2 quarters. Is that a strength, weakness, opportunity, or threat?
Internal weakness.
It's an internal weakness, right?
Could it be external threats too?
It could be if the way that was written is that in South Africa, there were declining sales in shoes in the last 2 quarters. But the way that it is, it's internal. The biggest competitor for our company is headquartered in South Africa. What is that one?
Internal threat.
That's
External threats. Mm-hmm.
Exactly, external threat. And we have a strong marketing team. What's that?
Internal
Right.
strength.
Correct, internal strength. And finally, the current vendor of rubber soles. Oh, we have 2 more. Current vendor of rubber soles is located in South Africa.
Internal strength.
Is it external opportunities?
It's an opportunity. That's right. Current
Ah.
vendor. So that's outside. That's not looking at our organization. It's outside. So
Okay.
it's an opportunity. How about this one? We have an aging workforce. We have an
Internal weakness. Internal weakness.
weakness. What if I said South Africa has an aging workforce?
External threat.
Right. Does everyone see that? It would be an external threat.
So on the exam, Rebecca, are they going to be clear, or is it going to like come down to 2 and we just have to pick the best one of the 2?
Much clearer than I was on this example. They will be very clear when it comes to SWOT. They will say, your organization is experiencing declining sales in the last 2 quarters.
Okay.
So you'll know very clearly if it's internal or external. Any questions about SWOT?
Would you do both a SWOT and a PESTEL, or is it either or?
It's usually either or. What often will happen is that maybe an organization will start with a SWOT, and then 3 months down the line, when they're ready to go forward with the strategy, then they'll do the PESTEL, because then they'll have a better idea of what it is they're looking at. But typically, you don't do them at the exact same time.
So if you're doing a SWOT and things like political come up, those would be like external threats. And then, like you said, if you're doing a PESTEL down the road, then it can fit into its own slot.
Exactly. And if you do it down the road, if you go forward with your strategy, what you're going to do in that PESTEL is say, okay, this is still a threat for us. So how are we going to mitigate it? And is it worth us going forward at this point? Or what do we need to do to make this still viable for us for a strategy?
Okay, I see now why I was confused. Basically, I thought environmental scanning was separate from SWOT analysis, when actually SWOT analysis is a part of environmental scanning.
Exactly. So PESTEL, SWOT, and the next two are all parts of, or just different types of environmental scans that you can do.
Okay.
Yeah. Another one is called growth share matrix. And organizations use this to determine what products and services they have that are the most valuable. In the growth share market or matrix, organizations compare their products, their services, their programs based on what type of market share you might have. And then they look at it also in terms of the growth rate in the market. They look at how fast the growth is and how much market share they have. So for example, we have a shoe company, and let's say we have 4 different types of shoes. We've got athletic shoes, we've got flip-flops, we've got women's pumps, and we have children's shoes. And we can look at all 4 of these and we can say, all right, well, athletic shoes, we don't have a lot of the market share because there are so many companies that make them. And the athletic shoes that we already have, we're not selling very much of them. So our market growth isn't big. We're not growing. We're just staying stagnant. So that would be what we call a dog. They consume our resources, but they're not showing any value and there's no future growth. If we have, for example, let's say flip-flops, and we have a high growth, we're continuing to grow flip-flops. We're selling them, we just sell them out wherever we go, but there's so many different competitors in terms of flip-flops that we don't have a lot of the market share, then that's called a question mark. Because we don't have the market share, but they continue to grow. So maybe that's something we need to invest in. We're just not sure. With children's shoes, we have a lot of the market share, but we don't have a lot of growth. So we're continuing to sell, but we're not selling more than we have in the future. In the future, our sales aren't going up. So that's a cash cow. It's always going to bring us money, but we're never going to get more money than we anticipate because it's just not growing. But then our women's shoes, our ladies' pumps, we have all the market share and it continues to grow because we have the best products out there. Those are our superstars. So you use this particular matrix to say, all right, if those are our 4 products, which one do we want to spend our money and our resources on? Well, you're going to want to spend your money and your resources on ones that you know are stars and probably the cash cows, but not spend your resources on those dogs, on the ones that don't have market share and there's no real future growth. So you just think about your own organization. If you have products or services, you could probably identify which of those products or which of those services fall in each of those 4 quadrants. And then you can, even if you don't work with strategy or marketing, you could probably figure out why your companies market the way they do based on the growth share matrix. So let me stop there. What questions do you have about this one?
It sounds like this is looking internal only.
Well, it's internal and external. It's internal because you're looking at your products or your services, but you're comparing that to the market.
To the market, yeah.
The market's external.
On question marks, is that just like a random thing? You don't know for sure? So
Yeah.
you just...
Yeah, so question mark would mean you know that it's growing, but you can't really pinpoint why it's growing because you don't really have market share. So you don't have enough data to say, ooh, we should spend a lot of money here or it's going to continue to grow. You just don't know why yet. So it's a question mark because while it's growing, you can't predict that it's going to continue to make money for you.
Rebecca, this is Mary. I got a quick question. So HR doesn't typically do this analysis, correct? I mean, we're going over this information so we understand it, right, when we're sitting in those meetings. But any organization that I've worked with, usually risk or finance kind of does this type of analysis.
They do, and what we suggest is that we should be doing it internal to HR too. So whatever the big picture strategy is for the organization, it needs to trickle down, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute, into our various functions so that HR strategy mirrors the organization strategy. And if that's the case, we need to be looking at our own individual products and services that we're doing to say, where are they? What are they? And market share and growth rate might not be the right things that you're analyzing, but you can very easily say within HR, what services do we do that are, you know, are in demand for our resources, are in demand for our workforce, and going to continue to grow the strategy of the organization. So for example, it might be something like leadership development. Is leadership development in your organization a star, meaning it is absolutely doing what you want it to do, or is it a dog and you've got to rework it? So you can do these same growth matrix for HR, and you can do it to trickle down whatever the strategy is from the main organization.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Before an organization, oh yeah, Tiana?
Sorry, I was just saying that after reading so much about strategy and the different analyses that we'd have to do, as it sounds again more like SHRM wants you to view HR as like a business partner, less more than administrative work, because you're constantly reminding yourself that you're a partner to the business rather than just doing regular HR functions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other piece that you'll notice in your book, and it talks about a lot, is that we want that to be the entire profession. We want the profession of HR to be one that has business acumen, that understands what's happening in the rest of the business, that can guide the people who are doing strategy to think about the workforce while they're creating the strategy. So yeah, your ultimate goal should be one of business partner.
So you don't have like employees who are stars, dogs, or cash cows?
You certainly will.
Oh, okay.
You certainly will. And when we talk about performance management, Heidi, we'll talk a lot about that. But if you remind me, I'll use that terminology for you.
So funny.
Please do, it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So before an organization creates a strategy, you have to be able to just define who you are. And you define that in terms of your purpose, your aspirations, and your beliefs, which are the mission, vision, and value for the organization. The mission is your purpose. What does the organization intend to do? What do we intend to be? What do we want to be? The vision is your guiding image of the organization's desired future. And your value, what do you believe in? What are your principles, and what are your guideposts? What's most important for you as your organization? Who can quickly and easily articulate the mission of your organization? Yeah, a lot of people can't. Can anyone think of the mission without looking at it?
I'd be making it up as I go.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
No one would know since we don't know. So some organizations have very clear missions, and some of them, they make it too long where people don't know what the mission is. But if you think about Google, any ideas what Google's mission statement is?
I'd have to Google it.
Yeah, it's to get the access to information. It's getting the access to information in the simplest way that you possibly can. And so an organization starts by setting the mission, vision, and values in order to be able to then set the goals, what the goals are of the organization. So your goals need to be set both at an organization level and at a department level. And hopefully what you do is you cascade those goals from one to the other. So you start with the organization goals, like increased productivity, and then you trickle that down to HR, and increased productivity becomes improved quality and efficiency of talent supply chain. So we're not going to increase productivity necessarily, but we can improve the quality of the talent that we bring in. We can improve the quality of the supply chain of workforce that we bring in. It's called cascading goals. And from the enterprise goal, HR can create its own strategic goal. Tiana, you might want to mute your phone because it's a little bit of a kickback. If you don't mind.
Who?
Tiana.
Oh.
Yeah, there you go. I think it's okay. So from the enterprise goals, HR can create its own strategic goal. and then trickle that down even further into the individual divisions and functions. If our HR goal is to increase effectiveness, then you can have a learning goal around that, a recruiting goal, an HRIS objective, and an HRM objective. And we'll talk about what all those terms are as we get to those areas. An area that you will see on the exam, and one that is something that you should know about in terms of being a business partner for HR for the rest of the organization, is called balance scorecards. Many organizations are using this tool to identify and measure their key performance indicators. And this is called a balance scorecard. Balance scorecards specifically help an organization to make sure objectives are strategically aligned in 4 areas: finance, customers, internal business processes, and learning and growth. Those are the 4 areas, and that's what you normally see on the exam. So you might want to just flag those 4, but which of those 4 are part of the balance scorecard. And the way that this works, so my organization did balance scorecards all the time, and we did them in every department. So HR, we had our own balance scorecard. And when we talked about a balance scorecard for HR, finance was, are we meeting our goals that are set for us in terms of our budget? How much are we spending for outside vendors? So maybe in my organization, we did outsourcing for executive level jobs. So we used a recruiting firm for executive level jobs. How much are we spending? That's finance. Customers would be about doing employee engagement and doing customer satisfaction surveys. Are our employees getting what they need from HR? Are our internal business processes supporting our employees in the way that we need them to support them, or are we just causing more headache for them than we want? And then what do we have in terms of learning and growth for our employees? So you can use this as a very simple but very effective way to measure how you're doing on your strategy. Does anyone use the balanced scorecard approach in your organization?
Nope.
Nope.
You might use it in some parts of the organization and not be aware of it, but it's relatively common now that as part of a strategic plan, you're looking at balanced scorecards.
We would use it if customers increased, and then finance will increase, and then everything kind of just falls into place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or the expenses will increase.
Yeah, you can use it just to say, you can use it to say, how well are we doing right now?
Yeah.
How well are we doing? What's getting in our way? And often what will happen is that you'll find one of those 4 areas is out of whack. So maybe it's finance, you're spending too much money, or maybe it's internal processes, which typically could be a problem for HR, that our processes become too burdensome and it's causing problems for our customers, for our reputation, and for everything in between.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most effective ways to evaluate our effectiveness in that balanced scorecard is also to look at what we call leading and lagging indicators. Leading indicators describe or predict our future performance. So they're predictive of future performance, our employee satisfaction, cost of hiring for a future project. And they say here, the associated costs of hiring and future retention rates. Lagging indicators describe things that have already happened. So turnover rate, implementation costs of last year's product, the employee engagement success or lack of success. So if you think about your organization, you can probably think of things that would predict both leading or lagging. So future is leading, lagging is in the past. When it comes to, let's say, any of those 4 on the balance scorecard: customers, learning and growth, processes, and finances. You might know that you have a huge hire that you have to do in the future, and it's going to cost a lot of money. So that's a leading indicator of the performance that will be on your strategy. Or maybe you know that the turnover rate for last year was 10% higher than it's ever been. That's a lagging indicator. The leading indicators are the ones, because they're future focused, that really help an organization move towards strategic achievement. Lagging can tell you, oh, these are lessons learned, we don't want to do that in the future with our strategy. Leading can tell you, this might be a problem if we continue to do what we're doing right now without changing it, if we want to meet this strategy. So if you're thinking about this in the future and for the exam, think leading is future and lagging is past.
From the root words, I was thinking lagging would have been a negative, but it says it can indicate both success and, not having success. So it's just future and past.
Yeah, it's just future and past, and neither one of them are either negative or positive. They're just future and past. Yeah, exactly. To measure performance towards strategic goals, the organization has to set them. And I'm sure you guys have heard of SMART goals. Now the term is smarter goals. And so the organization, as they're formulating their strategy, they're thinking about goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bound, but also that are evaluated regularly and then revised regularly to make sure that you are able to do the strategy that you want to do. So that's all part of formulation. Then we move into development. Once we create or formulate the strategy, we're ready to develop it. In this stage, we're really looking to answer, how do we get to the future we've envisioned? So we know what we want to do now. We know what the strategy is. How do we get there? Strategic fit. Did somebody have a question? Okay. Strategic fit is the compatibility of an organization's strategy with their internal and external environment. It expresses the degree to which an organization is matching its resources and capabilities with the opportunities that they have. So when we're trying to develop a strategy, one of the things that we have to do is say, do we have enough resources and the right resources to do what we want to get done? We're looking to see that it fits with the environment of the organization and that it fits external to the organization too. Michael Porter, who is a business strategist, said that when an organization has strategic fit, everything they do is consistent with their strategy. So if you think about an organization that doesn't have strategic fit, and maybe you have worked in an organization like this, you're like, well, why the heck are we doing that? Because nothing seems to match up with what we say we're going to do and what we're doing don't fit. But when you have strategic fit, what you say and what you do and the resources that you have and everything that's happening with the organization all are aligned and going towards the strategy.
Mm-hmm.
A strategy also should create competitive advantage either internally or externally. So if we're thinking about our strategy, external changes are adapting quickly to changes in the external environment. So for example, maybe we have to adapt to high gas prices or increased requirements for air quality. Internal changes are related to the organization's ability to reinvent themselves, change or innovate. So these are ways that we can become more competitively advantaged, have more of a competitive advantage, is by thinking about how do we change our strategy just a little bit, either internal or externally, so that we have more of a competitive advantage than we have in the past. One strategy that I think you might see in your book about here, but I'll talk about it and we'll talk about it more later, is called blue ocean. And this is when an organization creates a completely new product or a process or service that sets them apart from their competitors. So maybe with our athletic shoe, we realize when we do that pestle environment, that analysis, that there are a lot of organizations that make athletic shoes, but none of them make them with a particular material that is more environmentally friendly or more energy, creates more energy for the runner or whoever's using them. And so that's the blue ocean approach that we take. So we create a completely new product that's different than anything else that's on the market. That's called the blue ocean strategy. And what we're trying to do with create competitive advantage is to say, all right, this is what the pestle analysis or the SWOT analysis says for us. And what do we have to do to tweak it just a little bit so that we have that competitive advantage? Porter, who's also a strategist, identified 3 specific strategies that companies usually align to. They might say, all right, if we want to be the cost leader, we want to have the lowest price. We are always going to be the lowest price provider. Can you think of an organization that might have that strategy that's really well known?
Walmart.
There you go, Walmart. Walmart is the cost leader, right? So their strategy has and always has been that they want to have the lowest price. You might say, however, that we don't care as much about price. What we really want is to have a unique product. We want to do something that's different than anyone else. How do we differentiate ourselves from someone else? What's a product that might be a unique offering?
Tesla, maybe?
Tesla is a great example. Yes, Tesla, my dream car, by the way. And then you might have something that is a focus, which is a combination of both cost leadership and differentiation, in that they can be some type of niche, a niche environment. So one example of a niche environment is an airline. There's a particular airline that about 10, 15 years ago really had a niche environment because they said, we're going to just, at that time, just go regional. Anyone know what that one was?
Southwest?
That's right, Southwest. So Southwest at the time, about 15 years ago, said, we're going to be a low-cost provider because we're only going to travel in small regional segments. And so they became a focus competitive strategy. Now they're kind of moved out and differentiated a little bit. But that's what focus is. You've got a niche in a different way than you've ever had before. So this is something to flag in your book, because you will see this come up later around the exam, the difference between cost leadership differentiation and focus. And typically what I see is there will be a question that will say something like, if your organization decided to have a competitive strategy that offered a unique product, which competitive strategy would that be?
Differentiation.
Differentiation, exactly.
I didn't know if you wanted to name Porter or.
Yeah, no, differentiation. And by the way, the exam, as well as all the quizzes that I give you, are multiple choice, because that's what you're going to see. So you'll be able to narrow some down.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, it can be. It can be challenging too. HR strategy will change based on whatever the strategy of the organization employs. And so in differentiation, maybe, based on what that competitive strategy is, maybe we have to change our own strategy. So in differentiation, so if our organization, our athletic shoe company says, we want to differentiate our product from anything else, we're going to need to hire different skilled experts in that particular unique offering. Or if our strategy is cost segmentation, so we want to be the lowest cost, we're going to have to figure out a strategy of getting the lowest cost employees in who have the most skills. And same thing with niche. You just have to think about, what does our strategy need to be in HR that matches to the strategy of the competitive strategy of the organization.
When they go global.
And go global. Exactly. So there are also some growth strategies that an organization might have. And it happens often when organizations come together for whatever reason. These is something you want to flag on your page, because these are on the exam typically. You first have something that's strategic alliance. And this is when an organization shares assets with another organization, another company. So two companies agree to share their assets. Maybe they agree to share resources, or they agree to share space, but it can be any type of asset. A joint venture is similar to that, except that within a joint venture, the two companies invest money together to form a new organization. And that's often a question on the exam, to differentiate between a strategic alliance and a joint venture. And the big difference is, with a joint venture, we're going to spend some money. There's going to be an outlaying of cash by both of us in order to share our resources or our assets to form a new company. An equity partnership is when one firm buys partial ownership of another for whatever reason. Maybe the one organization is suffering, or maybe we just want to have a bigger market share, so we buy one partial ownership of another. Mergers and acquisitions, the company purchases the assets of another company, usually resulting in expanding the employee base, expanding the facilities. Franchising is when you trademark a service or a product. McDonald's, for example, you get a franchise, and then I'm going to pay the franchise company ongoing royalties so that I can use the McDonald's name. A licensing is when a company is granted rights to produce or sell a product. This is a bit of a higher risk than franchising, because I don't have all of the cookie cutter information and rules and processes for McDonald's. All I have is the product. I just have the rights to the product, but I have to do everything myself. So franchising is the lower risk and licensing is the higher risk. Contract manufacturing is when a company arranges for a local product or parts to be manufactured in a lower labor costs. So maybe we are selling our shoes in South Africa, but we have a local manufacturer in South Africa manufacture part of the product, so save us some money. That's what contract manufacturing.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
For the franchising, you're basically, it's an ongoing thing. You're using the brand or whatever, the product, whatever, and you're continuously paying the original company their money to continue using their product or their brand. But licensing, you've my brain, you've basically bought the rights, haven't you?
You have, yes, and you don't usually pay a royalty for licensing, although sometimes you do.
Okay.
Sometimes you do.
Question, this is Sherelle.
Yeah, Sherelle?
So the licensing, the book says a low risk entry strategy. You say it's high risk?
Well, it's higher risk than franchising only because you don't have it is a low risk, but you don't have all of the policies and procedures that the franchising usually gives you.
Okay, got it.
You mean like the code of conduct?
Yes, exactly. Well, everything, not just code of conduct, but with franchising, they'll tell you, like McDonald's, they're going to tell you, these are the menus. This is exactly what you have to do. Your people need to wear these uniforms. So everything is laid out for you. Whereas licensing, you're granted the rights to the product, but you don't necessarily have all of the background data the same way that you do the franchising.
You're not basically given any instruction on how to sell the product.
There you go.
Like Shark Tank.
Like Shark Tank. Yeah, exactly.
That's a good one. I'm writing that down.
Yeah, exactly. With the management contract, another company is brought in to manage and run the day-to-day operations. So South Africa, we're wanting to do athletic shoes. We don't want to move to South Africa, which I don't know why we wouldn't. It's my favorite place in the world, but we can't afford to move there. And so we bring in somebody who's local to manage and run the day-to-day operations. That's management contract. A turnkey operation is an existing facility when we acquire existing facility and run it without any major changes to the operations. So we just say, oh, wow, this is running so well, we're just going to come and take over it. That's a turnkey. Greenfield is when a company builds a new location from the ground up. It's a major commitment because we'll need new staff, new resources, potentially new buildings, new everything. That's a greenfield operation. But it's a growth strategy. We might choose, we want to grow, so we're going to come in and do that. And then brownfield, in contrast to greenfield, a brownfield is when we would reposition an abandoned or a closed or an underutilized property and change what it does to match what we need for our strategy. So greenfield is, everything's new from the ground up. Brownfield is it was abandoned or closed or underutilized and we're going to change it. You will want to know some of those growth strategies.
Does management contract go with contract manufacturing?
Not necessarily.
So with management contract, do you have to have your own location for them to would
No.
management contract go with either greenfield or brownfield?
No, think about management contract as in terms of workforce and people rather than a location, because management contract means that we hire some people to come in and manage and run the day-to-day operations.
So is it like RPO?
It could potentially be like that. So, but basically what it is we find a company that can, maybe it's a project management company. It is some type of organization that we can say, hey, we don't want to move to a different location. We would rather you come in and you run it for us and we'll pay you 10% of the profits or whatever it might be.
And
But you
turnkey
have to
is
have the established business there for them to come in and run it.
Right, exactly. So it's not necessarily outsourcing. It is finding a project management company or a company that can manage that particular organization because of the work they already do and where they're located.
Like, is it like payroll or HR?
Well, it's similar. So that's what Mary was just asking in terms of an RPO. So it's similar in that you're outsourcing, but it's not completely outsourcing because you're not necessarily giving away anything. They become like employees of yours.
So is it like a PEO model?
Similar. It's most similar. If you're thinking HR, then it's most similar to a PEO model, yes.
Would it be like ADP handling the,
Yep,
okay.
yep. Like ADP handling payroll, yes, it's very similar to that. Mhm.
And
And
turnkey is when we buy the company, basically,
Turnkey?
and we don't really make any changes to how they run their business. We
That's
just
right.
buy them.
That's right. It is so similar to what we're doing in our strategy, and they are working so well that we just come in and buy it and we don't change anything. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So growth and divestiture strategies. So we talked about growth strategies. Corporate strategies can also involve expanding or contracting the business. So we've talked about expanding in those, but you also have divestiture strategies as well. So maybe we decide we're going to sell off a piece of what we're doing. The level of HR involvement will depend on what type of strategy it is. If we're doing some type of divestiture and we're selling off part of our company, we're certainly going to be involved, because probably that's going to mean that staff is going to be laid off. So how do we get involved in that? If it's a growth strategy and it's a turnkey operation and we're taking charge of these employees, then we're going to be involved in a very different way. And so with each strategy that exists, our own level of involvement can be different depending on what it is. Once you develop the strategy, then you start to implement it. And this is when we translate that strategy into specific plans of actions. And the biggest thing about implementation is that it requires incredible communication to all members, all employees, so that everyone knows what's happening and we effectively manage the implementation of the plans. Typically, this includes some type of resource allocation, in that during the implementation stage, you now have both an operational budget, which is how we fund our ongoing activities for both the organization and for HR, and we have a strategic budget. And this budget is just to fund the new initiatives that are aligned with the new strategic goals. So as an organization during the implementation stage, we need to be thinking, how are we using our money wisely to budget for what we need now and what we need with this strategy? And then how are we communicating the strategy in a way that people understand what's happening and why it's happening? And this, by the way, is a step that is so critical, but is often overlooked. Communication needs to be both outward to the entire team and inward towards the leadership team or the strategic team. And it needs to include communication and conversations across the organization to prevent silos. What do I mean by silos? Who has an organization siloed? Does anyone have silos in your organization?
Never heard of it.
Okay, so a siloed organization is when, let's say I work in HR and somebody's working in finance and we never talk to each other. We don't know what the other one's doing. We don't know what strategy and goals that they're working on, and they don't know what we're working on, even though really we're so aligned in terms of what we do. But there's no communication between the various functions of the organization. So now, anyone work in siloed organizations?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? Right. So the key is to help employees see how their work connects to the strategy. And if you work in a siloed organization, this is the opportune time to talk about how the different parts of the organization fit together. So you can say, all right, we're going to implement the strategy, and this is what we're working on. We're trying to get Athletic Shoes, our company, to South Africa. You and HR, we're going to really depend on you to create the right workforce and put that workforce in place. And finance, we need you to manage both the strategic budget and the operational budget. And hey, you guys in IT, we really need you to create the technology so that we can go into South Africa. And every other department, we can start to talk about that. But siloed organizations are why we are in business in HR, by the way, because they can cause so many issues from an HR standpoint when we're not communicating together. There are various stages of the project when it comes to implementation. You've got planning, where you're defining the deliverables, you're scheduling, you're assembling the right teams to make sure that we're all got the right people on the bus to make sure we're doing the work. Then you're executing. And this is where we're actually working on the goals. This is really requires communication. It requires good leadership. I'd say great leadership to make sure we're removing the obstacles and managing stakeholders. And then it requires what they call closing, which is let's assess what we've done. Let's debrief. Let's circle back around and say, what did we learn from this? And what do we still need to improve or do differently? And that, it shows here as a linear process, but really it's more of a circular process, because you should be doing that assessment and evaluation as you go through the implementation to course correct to make sure that that strategy is most effectively implemented in the organization. There are some specific approaches that are often used during project management. So when you're in the middle of implementation, they can be things like lean. And lean is about eliminating waste. How do you get an organization that is lean? Meaning, how do you make sure that there's not duplication of processes, duplication of people doing the same thing, that we only really needed one? How do we make our organization leaner? Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get rid of people. It means that people are going to do the things that are most important so that we're not wasting resources or time. Six Sigma, you've probably heard of. It was developed by GE back in the 1980s, and it's about quality and processes. And Six Sigma specifically is about eliminating errors in your processes. So how do you look at getting processes in place that have the least amount of errors so that you're most effective? Agile is a term that is becoming very, very popular. And agile organizations are really about making sure that you have an organization that's flexible and that is able to deliver on products in the easiest possible way, the most flexible possible way. And then critical chain is used when resources aren't available. So it's a method of planning and managing products that emphasize the resources required to execute the project. I don't think you'll necessarily need to know what these terms, definitions mean, but they may ask you questions about what are some processes that you could do or approaches that you could do towards project management, and they'll list these for you. So let's talk some quiz questions for you. Corporate leadership has requested that HR develop an employee engagement and strategy for a newly acquired division. What phase in strategic planning will HR be using to gather information to create this strategy?
Formulation.
Everyone agree?
Yes.
Formulation, that is right. So gather information is the key piece of that. All right, how about this one? What is the difference between a strategic alliance and a joint venture? A, strategic alliance does not involve equity. In a joint venture, both partners contribute equity. B, a strategic alliance is informal and a joint venture is contractual. C, strategic alliances create a new economic entity. Joint ventures create synergy. Or D, a strategic alliance takes longer. Joint ventures usually happen quickly.
I think it's A.
I've heard A from a couple of you. It's in fact A.
Yay!
Joint venture, money. Just think it's a venture. It's an adventure. Venture capitalists think money. HR has been asked to develop a benefits and compensation plan for a US-based company opening a factory in Venezuela. What type of analysis would aid in understanding the business environment in this new location?
A.
A, correct. Pestle. So you might do a SWOT. We didn't even talk really about trend and gap analysis, but Pestle is going to give you the most information that you can possibly want about that business environment. How about this one? An organization is considering restructuring its sales function to align its salespeople against key vertical markets. What is the first step in the change management process?
Complete an environmental scan.
That is correct. Does everyone agree?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The first thing you're going to do before you schedule a meeting with the salespeople, communicate the change, because you don't know what the change is yet. You're going to do an environmental scan. Which of the following is a threat for a company that wants to build a chemical producing factory in a small town? Strong relationships with key vendors, community resistance, organizational resistance, partners who will invest in the company's technology.
B.
B,
B.
community resistance. So we're talking A threat, which would be external, so community resistance, correct. Strong relationships with key vendors would be what on the SWOT analysis?
Opportunity.
Is it a strength, what weakness, opportunity? It could be an opportunity or it could be a strength. Yeah, either one. Mhm. Organizational resistance to expansion is probably a weakness. And partners who invest in the company is probably an opportunity as well. Okay, the final stage is about evaluation. And it appears as the final stage of strategic management, but it's often a factor in all the preceding stages. Hopefully, you are course correcting as you need to do. Because what you want to do, you want to be saying, what do we plan to do? How did it turn out? And what do we need to do to correct or do it differently? A step that is often forgotten, again, in this stage is about communicating the results. And this, I'm sure that you all can relate to this, but often what will happen is that an organization will say, hey, we're doing this great new thing. It's fantastic. We need you to do all your work on it. This is the strategy. We need you to do everything, focus everything on this. And then you never hear anything again. I don't know if anyone's ever experienced that.
Yep.
But employees work really hard on strategy, whatever it is in your particular context. So not just the strategy people do it, but every department has some work that they do related to that goal. And if nothing happens and we don't know how it turns out, it can lead to disappointment. It can lead to frustration by all of the workers. So we really want to create a narrative that explains the results, visualize, give them some kind of a visualization to say, hey, this is what's happened. This is what we've done. You know, you can use any one of those tools that we talked about in the last couple of weeks that are in your book. Visualize them. Let's talk about what didn't go as well as what was a success, and then invite some reactions and feedback. So here is similar to what you'll see on the exam in terms of a question. A company currently spends over $1 billion in health-related areas. The company has multiple locations. The VP of HR has been tasked to develop a strategy to improve employee health, reduce costs, limit the company risks, and linking the healthcare strategy to corporate strategies. Okay, so our job has been to develop a strategy to improve health, reduce the risks of the organization around health. And we want to link that strategy to the corporate strategy. The CEO wants to analyze the competition's current safety legislation, supervisory strengths, and assembly line operations related to that. What should the HR director recommend the CEO to accomplish this? Which of these four analyses would really help them do those things that the CEO wants to do?
A SWOT, but that's a SWOT. Isn't a SWOT also an environmental analysis?
It's an environmental scan.
Oh. Okay. Let me write that down.
It's not often that they'll try to give you a trick question, by the way.
Yeah.
They really don't try to do trick questions, but SWOT is correct. It's the SWOT analysis. What is an example of an economic factor that should be included in an environmental scan?
Consumer price index data.
Anyone agree? Anyone think differently?
A, proposed energy consumption regulations.
Okay, so it's actually C, it's computer price. What would A be in terms of the pestle?
I think that'd be law.
No, it's probably environment. It's
That would be external.
Energy.
It's environment, so it's going to be energy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Energy.
So if it's anything with price is going to be economic. Sorry, somebody had a question.
I guess the regulations confuse me with that one.
Sorry, Sherelle?
I think the word regulations made me think it was more legal.
Oh, gotcha. I understand that. That makes sense. Okay. All right, a South African company and a European company purchased shares in an electronic manufacturing firm. The companies share profits, control, and liability according to the amount each has invested. What type of growth strategy is this?
Equity partnership. Wait a second.
Yeah, equity.
Equity. That's correct. Okay, let's see. Somebody who hasn't answered, I'm going to give you a new one. How about this one? How should the VP of HR develop a healthcare strategy that will link with the corporate strategy? Should they benchmark the HR strategy against industry practice? Align the healthcare strategy with the organization's human capital vision and mission? Focus on developing the most cost-effective, or focus on understanding and satisfying senior management desires?
B.
B, I hear. Anyone think anything different?
I don't know. They'll talk about costs too. So
They do, but this is a question that just a little useless, maybe useful trivia for you. Whenever you see a question that asks about aligning strategy, it is almost always the answer. So going back to this, sorry, where was I? Where did I go? Okay. I just totally lost it there. There we go. Okay. Healthcare strategy will link to the corporate strategy. Of these four, B aligns the healthcare strategy with the organization's vision and mission. If there's ever an opportunity in your answers to say, how does it relate to the overall organization? That's typically 9 times out of 10 going to be your answer. So you're right. Some of these focus on cost effective is going to be really important, but aligning it to the organization as a whole is going to be the number one thing that SHRM will suggest to you to do.
So the answer is B, right?
The answer is B.
yeah, okay.
It is B. Yeah. How should the VP develop the healthcare strategy to ensure that it addresses the health needs of the employees? Listen to the water cooler, conduct focus groups, survey the entire workforce, evaluate the data.
I don't know. We did all of those.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
E.
Heidi, often. What was the most effective?
I think C.
C.
You'd be right. C, B and C, focus groups and surveying the entire workforce are good, and probably you might do both of them, but the large survey of the entire workforce is going to give you more data more quickly
Okay.
because it's a larger sample. What can HR do to ensure that the new healthcare strategy is understood and the benefit is used effectively by all employees? Develop and mail healthcare brochures, send a mass email, conduct a health fair, or at each location, introduce providers and lead Q&A sessions.
C.
C, conduct the health fair.
Okay, so I've got health fair, I've got C,
I'm stuck between A and D.
and I've got A and D. Oh, okay, now I like it. Everyone's all over. So one of the strategies that you should do when you're taking the exam is knock out the two that make the least amount of sense, okay? So which two don't make as much sense? Can you think of one? What doesn't make sense?
B. B doesn't make any sense to me.
A mass email does not make sense. I completely agree. You would not necessarily want to do that. What other one may not make sense?
D.
I don't like A.
Okay, it's actually A. Why don't
I
you?
knew it.
A, no, A is not right. A is not right. Why wouldn't you?
It is
A is one-way communication.
That's
Yeah.
correct. A
okay.
is one-way communication. So C and D give you the opportunity to actually talk to the person.
Okay.
So if C and D allow you to do some type of conversation, which of those two do you all think probably is the better?
I would say D.
I think D.
Okay, I'm hearing D.
C. Why wouldn't A be, I mean, so with communication, you want to use as many modes as possible, right?
Yes, you do, but the problem with A is that it doesn't allow them to have any kind of feedback back to you to ask the questions that you want. That might be something you do after C and D, but
Okay.
it's not going to be your first step.
Got it.
I think
guess
it's because you mean it's like a lecture where there's only information going out, but no way to know that it was effectively understood.
Or received or anything else. Yeah.
Healthcare is unique for each person. So
Ah, yeah.
And I would also think mailing, a lot of people really don't read.
They just
Exactly.
throw it away.
To the mail.
Exactly, right? So yeah, if you send me anything by mail, you can pretty much guess I'm not going to read it unless it actually. So yes. So the answer is actually D. The reason why C is not a bad solution. And in years past, they used to give you partial credit and you would have been given partial credit for that. But D is better because it allows you to get some Q&A and it provides in every environment a location and a kind of an expert for every environment. So it says introducing providers at each location. So then they have somebody that they can go to say, hey, I have a question about that strategy that you're doing. So C is not bad, D is just a little bit better.
See, if they said with each employee, I would have picked D. But
With each, okay, got it. Instead of all employees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's mass chaos there.
it could be. Well, and the other problem with the healthcare, by the way, the other reason I would rule that one out is because the healthcare isn't usually required. You don't have to go to a health fair, and you might have people who don't go by every booth at a health fair. They might not get the information that they could by introducing providers in a Q&A session. So that's strategic planning. What questions do you have about that before we move to talent acquisition?
I think it's mainly that you get the message out effectively.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. Yeah. So I'm going to send you some quizzes, a quiz to take on strategic planning like I did last week, so that you have it. And I'll send you the answer key the following week. But look at the key concepts that I send you as well. And I think I sent you that last week. The key concepts really identify the things that you'll want to know, both from an HR knowledge standpoint, but also if you are studying for the exam. That's what you'll want to know. You want to take a 5-minute bio break and we'll come back and do talent acquisition?
Okay.
Yes, please.
Yes.
All right, so let's come back around 7:15.
Okay.
Okay, let's talk about talent acquisition. Everyone ready?
Yes.
So excited to be moving on to this. All right, so talent acquisition is all about staffing and making sure that we have the right resources, the right qualified individuals to be able to do the work that we need to get done.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, this is a huge part of HR. Staffing is a skill all in itself and figuring out who the right people are. And then part of staffing is now, it's much more than just an operational transactional function of HR. There are very strategic pieces to strategy and strategies around staffing, which include things like sourcing, which we'll talk about in a minute. Based on what's going on in an organization, if an organization grows or departments change for whatever reason, strategic regions such as these, we have implications for HR. So if there are mergers and acquisitions, we probably need to have new resources, or we need to retain who we have. If there's a joint venture, we might need, from our standpoint, we might have to do things differently in terms of which employees we're using, what type of talent we're using. Same thing with Greenfield, we're going to have new employees in place.
Mm-hmm.
And then strategic alliances, there might be requirements in terms of that new venture that's formed. So we just need to know, based on that growth strategy, what kind of implications will that have on our staffing? The approach an organization takes to staffing is really dependent on its business philosophy, and you might want to flag this page because this becomes very important in the questions that are asked throughout all of the different modules that we're talking about. If an organization is one that is ethnocentric, that's an organization that has very tight control, there's little autonomy, and an ethnocentric organization says, hey, if there's a key position, it's always going to be staffed from somebody from our headquarters, because our way is the only way. So ethnocentric organizations are ones that really say, those of us who are in the headquarters, we're the only ones who know how to do what we're doing. So we're the ones who are going to get key positions in the organization, no matter where they may be located. If you work in an organization that's more polycentric, that's in an organization that is like a subsidiary. Mm-hmm. So you have different offices that run very different from others. Mm-hmm. That is, from a talent acquisition standpoint, the local personnel manage their own operations. And so there's very little movement from a subsidiary to another subsidiary. So people from the headquarters and the subsidiaries operate very differently, and there's very little movement between them. So if we're staffing for one particular location, we wouldn't necessarily look at the other locations to staff. If you work in a regiocentric organization, that's where operations are managed regionally. And there's good communication between the region, within the region, but poor communication outside of the region with HR. So if I'm trying to staff something within that region, I might talk to all the offices that are located within that area, but I'm not necessarily going to talk to HR and headquarters or the global HR to help us out. And then in a geocentric organization, this is the best. This is when it doesn't matter where you're located. We're all seen as one organization. We recognize that talent comes throughout the organization. And maybe the most talented person is somebody who's working in the smallest office, and that doesn't matter. Employees move between geographic regions. They move between subsidiaries. There's a really great communication on who the greatest employees are, and everyone knows it. Mm-hmm. So these are 4 strategies that companies take on, and it impacts how you staff for those positions. Ethnocentric, remember, think it's our way or the highway. There's only headquarters. That's the most important. And geocentric is the one that we really want to strive towards, where it doesn't matter where you're located, everyone can be seen as a valuable resource.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Polycentric and regiocentric, couldn't you say that for both of them, headquarters have little impact on them?
Yes, true. But the difference between the two is that regiocentric, the regions are talking to each other, but they may not be talking to headquarters, whereas polyocentric, no one's talking to anyone.
Okay, that explains it. Communication.
Staffing patterns for global organizations can really change over time. When an organization first begins its operation in a country, they rely most heavily on expats, also known as international assignees, which we'll talk a lot about later on. Expats or international assignees are usually what we call home country employees who are on contract into another employee and to another country. And typically they have the experience that's needed in that host country, and that's why they're called in to that organization. International assignees are commonly utilized in the early stages of establishing a new office, a new country office or subsidiary, because they have the skills, the management skills that are needed, or the technical skills that are needed. And then organizations set a strategy for how long they're going to keep that particular expat in the country. And my own experience with this is that you say, we're going to keep them in there for a year. And then after a year, we want them to hire somebody to be able to do the work that somebody else can do already. So you're trying to build up the expertise within that country so the expat can leave. Regardless of an organization's approach to global talent, it's imperative for organizations to create an image that potential employees are attracted to. So what you're trying to do with your staffing patterns and your talent acquisition in general is you're trying to get people to like your brand. What is it that attracts people to want to work for your organization? And so no matter if you're an expat organization globally or you're in one city in one office, you're really trying to work on what your employment brand is. So think about your own organization. What do you think the employment brand is that makes people think, wow, I really want to work there? What is the employment brand for your organization? Can anyone?
For mine, it's Health Trust.
Health Trust.
Yes, so that's the name of they changed the name of the company from Parallon to Health Trust, which is trust us with your health, whether it be your nurses, your nurse staffing needs, or, we're a division of HCA, so we staff for the healthcare companies.
But what's the employment? Why would people want to work for you? That's the marketing, but why do they want to work for you?
The full name of the company is Health Trust Workforce. So we staff the workforce for your healthcare organization, and trust us with your workforce because we have expertise within HCA already. We're the leading staffing specialist for HCA. That's what they're saying that their brand is, why people want to work for us.
See, because that to me sounds like a marketing brand, not an employment brand.
Oh, I'm writing that down right now.
What do you all think when you hear that?
Marketing.
Yeah, and why, Sandy?
Because they're trying to get the name out there so people recognize the name recognition.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry. They're trying to get name recognition, so by offering the products that so people can see what they offer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that they're enticed to do business with you because you have the employees that they can trust.
Right.
But it's not the reason why I might want to work there. So
it could be benefits. It could be like some of those organizations have the best places to work for.
Yes. That's what you really want in terms of employment brand. So if you think about Google, Google is known for its employment brand. At Google, the perks that you have, there are nap pods. You could go in and take naps if you need to in the middle of the day. There are free meals. There are Google bicycles you can use to go all over the complex. There's a slide that takes you from the second floor to the first floor should you not want to use the stairs. So they have created a brand to say, hey, we want to have this really fun, incredible place for you to work. Mm-hmm. That's really what the brand is about. What compels me as a potential employee to want to work for your organization? And from a talent acquisition standpoint, employment brands are huge, and we don't spend a lot of time thinking about them. because it's what positions the organization as the employer of choice in the marketplace. And it
Mhm.
describes why people want to work for you.
Mhm.
It should be part of your organization's recruiting strategy, because without it, recruitment efforts are more short-term, they're reactive, they're to fill a particular position, and they don't take the time to say, this is who we are, this is who we want to be, and these are the type of employees we want in our organization. Google, it always comes to mind because you hear so much about work for that organization. They get, for one position, they typically get over 10,000 applications for every position that they post. And depending
Wow.
on the position, they can get closer to 40.
Wow.
So if you don't stand out, we'll talk more about that later on, but that's because of their employment brand. And it's related to their employee value proposition, which is the foundation for the employment brand. It's aligned to your vision, your mission, your strategy, your values, and it seeks to answer two questions. Why would a talented person want to start to work for this organization? And why would they want to continue to work for this organization? That's what an employment value proposition does. So within your own organization, think about it. Why somebody want to start working for us, and why would they continue to work for us? And if you can't answer those two things and you work in HR, there's a brand problem. You need to start thinking about what's getting in the way of people wanting to be here. That's what the brand is. How many of you are familiar with Glassdoor? Okay, so you can at some point go on glassdoor.com and you can search for your company and you can find out what people are thinking about your company in terms of employment brand. Glassdoor just is a housing site for reviews from ex-employees and current employees about what it's like to work for your organization. And most organizations will be listed on Glassdoor. Government, I'm not so sure, but I wouldn't be surprised. I haven't looked recently on that. But it's really a place to begin the process of building the brand, because you can go there and you can see really quickly, if you do it, how you're perceived. But be prepared, because you're going to see how you're perceived, which might be positive and it might be negative.
It's not true. It's not true what they said about me.
It's funny because you can see some pretty amazing things. About 3-4 years ago, I was called by a recruiting company to come interview for a particular job, and I went on Glassdoor, and there was not one positive review about this organization, not one.
Wow.
Negative after negative after negative, and they had just gone through a huge change the strategy. They actually fired every single executive that was there, and that's why they were doing all this hiring, because they knew that was the issue. So they were starting to work on their employment brand by getting rid of everyone and starting over. But building the brand, if you ask these questions that are on the slide right now, it's really the start of a SWOT analysis to get a good picture of what your brand is and what you need to change to make it better. Once you have the brand, then you have to make sure you have the right people and the right jobs in place to get the work done so that your brand stays the way you want it. And two ways that you do that are through job analysis and job documentation. The job analysis is the systematic study of the responsibilities of a particular job. The idea is to be able to collect enough data on the job to differentiate it from other jobs. You can do this through interviews, through observations, through questionnaires, or by just watching somebody do a particular job and taking a log of everything that they do on that work. So you do a job analysis first to study what are the responsibilities for the job, and then you do job documentation, which is job descriptions, to create a job description with the specifications and competencies to say, if you're in the job of a business analyst, these are all of the tasks that you'll do on a regular basis. And that job description will include things like these common elements, the position summary, the minimum qualifications, the duties and responsibilities, if there are physical demands, working conditions, etc., and then additional elements. So you'll be able to see the common things and then additional things that will need to be done for a particular job description. Has anyone ever had to write job descriptions?
Yes.
So much fun.
Yes.
It's kind of, and it becomes what's the word I'm looking, monotonous.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because they give us a general description to go with, and then they change it according to whatever it is that I have to do.
Well,
So the
and
special.
what I'll tell you is I don't think HR should be writing job descriptions except for HR. I feel really strongly about that. And I've my entire career, I've pushed back on other executives to say, I can help you write it. I can help you write the right language and the right words to make it pop the way you want it to on a posting. But for me to write a job description about IT is crazy. I don't know their terminology. I don't know what they do on a daily basis. I can help them tweak it, but really, the more you can push back on the functions to write their own, the better it'll be for them and for you. Job specifications are written into a job description and the postings, and they describe the minimum qualifications needed for the job. This usually includes things like experience, education, training, licenses, etc., and should be accurate for the job. And when I see this particular slide, I always crack up because I have a friend who was applying for a job for a logistics manager in a paint store for PPG Paint, which is a nationwide paint company. She was the logistics manager. And on her job specification in the job description said she had to be able to lift 100 pounds of paint. She was a logistics manager that was going to be telling people, basically assigning drivers for where they were going to go every single day. There was no reason she needed to lift paint. But she went for the interview. They actually called her back in to do like a testing and assessment center, which we'll talk about in a second. And they made her lift paint. And she talked to her manager afterwards who called to hire her. And he said, well, great experience. And he said, how did you feel about the assessment? And she said, well, great, except, my muscles are really hurting from lifting the paint. And he's like, why did you have to lift paint? It's just an example of something that shouldn't ever be in a job specification for a particular job. So if you're looking at your job descriptions, make sure that they're accurate. If you have a desk job, you shouldn't necessarily include things about what you need to be lifting. If you're doing a job that does require lifting, you need to make sure that it's in there. So a little quiz question, and let's see, Heidi, you happen to be on the top of my sheet, so let's ask you this question and we'll kind of go down the list. Headquarters staff are given key positions throughout the organization. Headquarters staff are given key positions throughout the organization. This is an example of which talent acquisition orientation?
Headquarters. Would that be ethnocentric?
That would. Ethnocentric. Exactly. Sherelle, you're next on my list. What is most characteristic of a geocentric approach to staffing? Managers frequently move from one country to another, but they remain within a single geographic region. Each local company selects its own managers from within its own country. Headquarters country personnel fill key management positions worldwide, or nationality is ignored in favor of ability to the most appropriate people for identified for key jobs.
I said D.
That's right, D, exactly. Tiana, you're next. How can an organization's value proposition be reflected accurately where there are deliberate messages about the organization that describe work conditions, culture, intangible rewards, and the emotional connection employees have within the organization? Vision, mission, position description, competency dimensions, employment brand.
I think it's employment brand.
You would be correct. It is employment brand. All right. Mary, what is an example of a plausible job specification for a line supervisor? Requires 3 to 5 years of experience, requires a bachelor's degree, requires versatility to meet diverse business requirements, requires creative ability to apply resources.
A.
A, correct, for a line supervisor. All right. So how many of you know what sourcing is?
I do sourcing at my company.
Oh, good. Okay, so you can't answer this, Tiana. Who else knows? Does anyone know what sourcing is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What is sourcing other than what's written on the page? How would you define it? So basically, sourcing is when you create a pool of candidates, even when you don't have a position right away. So you are trying to source so that when a position comes available, you've got a bench of people that you can look to and say, hey, we've got this position and we want to talk to you about this particular position. You can source internally, you can source externally, but really it is having a bench of people who could do a job when that job becomes available. One of the most common places to source these days is LinkedIn.
Yep.
Do you do a lot of sourcing with LinkedIn, Tiana?
Yes, I do.
So LinkedIn has really created, they've kind of created a niche for themselves to be the sourcing place. I have a lot of ex-employees who we sourced before we had a job available. And part of sourcing is finding out what their qualifications are, finding out if they'd be interested if a job comes available, and doing some of the legwork before you even start the recruiting process so that the recruiting process becomes easier. Sourcing is used in relation to recruiting, obviously, because you then it makes the recruiting process easier, but it is more about the qualified candidates, and recruiting then is about getting people to apply for positions. There are both internal and external recruiting methods. They include things like internally employee referrals, succession planning, nominations, job posting, job bidding, inside moonlighting, skills banks transfer. What do some of these mean to you? When you look at this list, what do those mean? Who uses various things?
So session planning, I think, is preparing someone for a leadership position that is maybe new, empty, like it's new now, and you're preparing someone that you believe has the ability or the leadership qualities to be able to take over a future position or that position that is available.
Well, yeah, and succession plan, the one thing that I would slightly correct on what you just said is that it's not necessarily for an available position or one that's empty. It's often for a position that somebody's in it, but they may be they may be promoted, they may be ready to retire. So you're looking at your critical key positions and making sure that there's a succession plan for when that position is empty to fill it. So you do it before it's empty. Job posting is when you have some type of internal posting mechanism. Nominations, when you allow somebody to nominate someone for a role. External, you have a number of different recruiting methods, and don't think that you need to know what all of them are, but there are various ways that you can recruit. From this list, what do some of you use most regularly to recruit?
We've done open houses for technicians, especially at the end of the school year for high school kids who are wanting to get into the heavy equipment industry, and also for some people who are coming out of technical school. We'll open an open house and let them walk through the shops and see what kind of environment they would be in and take applications and resumes at that point.
Oh, nice, Missy. So you do like on-the-spot interviews too?
Yes, yeah, we'll have service managers there from all of the major shops, and it's more geared towards our technicians, not necessarily administrative positions.
Yeah.
But we do have service managers that will look over resumes and sit down with the employees or the potential employees and get a better feel for them, and then at that point, they move forward with a conditional job offer.
Great. Good. So there are also a number of ways that you can actually measure performance, and this is both from a staffing position, so we need to measure on a regular basis when we are getting people in and whether we have the right people, but also we need to measure some other things. So from a talent acquisition standpoint, typically we're measuring headcount. How many people are there on the payroll at a particular time? You can divide that into various groups to get to know the composition of the workplace. You can see how many managers you have, how many staff you have. If you're in a union environment, how many union employees you have. You can also measure the demographic trends within the workforce, age, race, gender, how many engineers there are, how many people make over $100,000, et cetera. It's important to do this from talent acquisition because it then feeds into your workforce planning and how many people you need in various roles. Another metric that is specific to talent acquisition, and one very popular one, is the cost per hire. This is one that I would flag for you. You measure this by adding the sum total of all external and internal costs and then dividing by the total number of hires in that particular period. Why might you want to know how much it costs for each hire?
So you can plan.
Budgeting.
Budgeting, yes. So you can plan, but budgeting becomes a really big piece of this, right? So if all of a sudden you're figuring out that you're spending a lot more on hiring than the number of people that you're getting in, the way you're doing talent acquisition isn't working for you. So then going back to this, you might be using the wrong recruiting method externally that's causing you more money than really you need to be using. Some other metrics to know are recruiting cost ratio, and this measures the expense incurred by the recruiting and hiring function in relation to the total compensation related expense incurred for the positions filled over the same period of time. So this is not one that you use a lot. I wouldn't worry as much about it, but I would think about those yield ratios that you see down below, because these are much more common and you're likely to see, especially that first one on the exam. Often you'll see questions asked, and if you work in talent acquisition, you might be wanting to do this if you're not already. How many qualified applicants were there related to the total applicants that we got? We talk about Google, when I was talking about earlier, they get 10,000 applications for every role. You probably weed out 9,970 immediately as not qualified. And then they look at the rest of them. You can do a yield ratio of minority applicants to total, female applicants. You can look at the offers extended to the qualified applicants, the offers extended to the final interview, offers extended versus accepted. And all of these can give you really good, valuable data on the amount of money and the type of recruitment efforts that you're using. The one that is without a doubt the most common for staffing departments, and the one that line managers typically complain the most about, is how long it takes to fill a position. What does your organization strive for when it comes to days to fill? Usually, companies say, we want to fill positions within 20 days or within 27 days, or maybe it's a position that requires an expert, so maybe it's a little bit longer. But what we need to know from an HR standpoint is how long is too long. So from your line manager's perspective, those of you who work in HR specifically, how long do people expect it to take you to fill a position?
In my company, 60 days.
60 days, okay. Someone else?
That's about right, 60 days too.
Okay, 60 days.
But it's really hard to get a qualified applicant too.
Right? It's very long, yeah. I have a lot of contacts at a financial planning organization, and their days to fill is around 120 days because it takes them that long to get the right people in place. And it can be very difficult to manage that expectation with your line managers who want somebody immediately. This is where sourcing becomes really important, that you have that bench of qualified candidates that you can call on immediately.
Rebecca, I had a question about days to fill, because I waffle about this. While I understand that it's important, I think that retention is more important than that. So, I mean, you can say, yeah, look, I filled your position in 40 days, but the person didn't stay. So I'm just always concerned when there's too much focus put on days to fill.
I absolutely agree with you. I agree with you. But part of that is managing the expectation of the managers and the hiring managers to say, yep, I can meet your expectation of 20 days or whatever it is, but know that if I do that, you might lose the most qualified candidates because they can't come that quickly. Mm-hmm. So I think it comes to really what this next one is around attrition. So helping your managers say, which is more important to you, keeping the right employees or getting the wrong employees in and then losing them pretty quickly for whatever reason.
I thought attrition, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I thought attrition was when the employee leaves, and the position is not is not filled after they go?
No, it has nothing to do with whether the position is filled after they go. Attrition is just really about figuring out why people leave for voluntary reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the loss of employees for reasons other than firing or employee initiated, which means that you're measuring how many people walk out the door from for voluntary reasons. If you can understand why people leave, you can start to pinpoint so many things around employment brand.
Mm-hmm.
You can really start to pinpoint, oh my gosh, they're leaving because our managers suck, or they're leaving because our benefits are horrendous. What is the reason why they're leaving? And I agree, Mary, with what Mary just said, which is this becomes a better indicator of what's happening in an organization than time to fill. But what happens usually is that HR people, and especially recruiters, are measured by that time to fill. So it means that you have to change that expectation of the leadership of why measuring that is important, but not the most important priority.
My company, it's constantly numbers. It's always numbers. We're always given like metrics every week to meet our numbers and our call goals and everything like that.
Yeah, often it is. So that it's helping people see why the numbers are not the best indicator of success. Yeah.
Is this where exit interviews are important?
Absolutely. Yeah. And we're going to talk more about those later. But
they don't do that too much.
Well, the interesting thing about exit interviews is that they can be really tricky and very sensitive. Often people are not going to want to give a lot of information to the organization when they're leaving. So you might end up using a third party that can do some of that for you, and can at least get the data for you. That tends to work a little bit better. It depends on how big your organization is, whether you can do that. But they have to feel like they can provide the information that they want to provide.
Well, they don't want to burn their bridges either. So.
For sure. Yeah, but there's, again, where Glassdoor can become very handy because you'll know why people tend to leave when you look at Glassdoor. So let's shift gears now for just a minute and talk about recruiting sources. You can source in a number of different ways, but recruiting has changed a great deal in the last 10 to 15 years. It used to be that you would post an ad in a paper, or you would post it in some type of what we would consider snail mail now. Now, e-recruiting is typically what we do. There's e-recruiting you can have obviously on your website. That would be considered e-recruiting. You can do social media. You can have something on LinkedIn. They have a whole job section on LinkedIn. You can post on external sites like SHRM and American Training and Development. They have jobs listed that you can actually look at jobs in HR if you wanted to do that. There are a number of different organizations that do e-recruiting now. From an advantages and a disadvantages state, you see some of the reasons, some advantages and disadvantages right here. Advantages, probably the biggest one, is that you get a more immediate response than somebody who is bringing in their resume to you or mailing their resume to you. It increases your applicant pool. But the downside is that you typically have a higher volume of unqualified candidates that are applying for the jobs that maybe they shouldn't be. As part of e-recruiting, you have social media, which is becoming more and more popular as a way to recruit for positions. Again, there are advantages and disadvantages. And there's often a question on this on the exam, just about what the advantages are versus disadvantages of either e-recruiting or social media. But there are things like this, from an advantage standpoint, it really increases the brand. It allows us to get more geographically diverse talent by doing social media, but the inaccuracy of information or the number of unqualified people can change from doing something like social media than any other source. No matter how you advertise, social media, website, old-fashioned, there's a specific selection process you should follow, which is this. You screen, you interview, you assess and evaluate, and you select in your offer. And whether yours are exactly like that, my guess is it'll be very similar to that. So let's talk about that first step, which is screening. Screening involves analyzing a candidate's information to see if they match the position that you're hiring for. And screening becomes really important because if you don't screen, you interview everyone who applies, you really have a whole lot of people that you're working through. Many companies are now using what's called an ATS system, or applicant tracking software, to screen resumes for them. How many of you have some type of applicant tracking software before I explain what it is? Anyone know?
I do.
Okay. Tiana, anyone else?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so ATS systems are online software applications that accept and store information that job candidates input. So the ATS sifts through the applications and helps hiring companies determine which candidates may be the most qualified for a given position based on criteria that is set by the employer. So you apply for a position, you never hear anything. It's probably because the applicant tracking system, the applicant tracking software, has weeded you out because what is the criteria from the employer doesn't match what your resume is saying. 75% of large companies in the US now use an ATS system, and that number is significantly growing, bigger and bigger every year, and it's even growing in smaller organizations. The biggest one of the biggest ones is Taleo. It's an organization, a software system called Taleo. And so what it does is that the employer says, I'm hiring for an HR business partner role. And if they're really an HR business partner that we want to take onto the interview stage, they're going to have these type of words in their resume: partner, strategy. They might have something about HR generalist. And so they list 20 words or so that the tracking system then uses to compare against your own resume as they come in. And the ones that have those words get sent up to the recruiter who's hiring for them to look at. The other ones just get filed in the system. That's what an applicant tracking software does. Whether you have an ATS, sorry, go ahead. Nope, I'm just hearing things. Whether you have an ATS system that screens for you or you're doing it yourself, looking at a person's curriculum vitae or CV or resume can be a great screening mechanism. The difference between a resume and a CV, if you don't know, the resume is more concise. It's usually 1 or 2 pages. I personally have a hard time with a resume over 2 pages. I have a roadblock on that because I think that resumes need to be more concise. Resumes typically are for just the last 10 years. CVs go into a lot more data, and they're used more often in academia or research positions, but they can be extensive in length, and they often include things like the candidate's accomplishments, publications that they've been, things that they've published or that they've been written up in, and they're much more relevant in those roles like academia because of all that information. The next step in the actual interview is the actual interview, and this typically involves asking the candidate a series of questions, probe their skills and their interests. And it can include usually 2 things. They're done in 2 ways: pre-screening and then the in-depth interview. The pre-screening is usually the informal telephone screening, and this is done by going over a person's resume and skills with them to decide how many people we really want to bring in for the interview. It's used to screen people out so that you can get the candidate interview list down to a manageable number. During the call, if you haven't done pre-screenings, typically what you're doing is you're checking that their experience matches the position that's needed, and you're often checking to find out if their salary expectations match what you need for this position. There's nothing more of a waste of time than bringing somebody in and finding out they're wanting $50,000 more than that's budgeted for this position, so you really want to pre-screen the right way. Then you bring in a short list of candidates in for an in-depth interview. And they can be for an hour or more, and they're conducted by the hiring manager of the function and may include some type of panel or other colleagues. I'm going to go through interviews and then we'll stop there. We'll just have a few more slides after that, but we'll stop right after we do the interviews, and we'll do the last 2 stages next Monday. There are different types of interviews. You have structured interviews. This is face-to-face where the candidate is probed and probed and probed again. Interviews are looking for dedication, teamwork, leadership, and who you are. In a structured interview, every candidate is asked the same thing. In contrast, in an unstructured interview, it's more conversational. There's less consistency in questioning, and it's really more about uncovering the candidate's behavior and personality and skill set based on the responses that they had to questions. Behaviorally based interviews are now probably the most popular and are used by employers to learn about your past behavior in particular situations, because the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And so those are the type of interviews that ask you questions like, give me an example of, tell me a situation about when you did this, how did you handle XYZ? So behaviorally based. Competency based, which is also referred to as situational, is a style of interviewing used to evaluate a candidate's key competencies. These are also behavioral, but focus specifically on the key knowledges or abilities that are needed for the job. Competency interviews can give valuable insight into an individual's preferred style, and so it can help you predict their future behavior based on their style of how they answer questions. And candidate interviews will ask questions that require a candidate to demonstrate that they have a particular skill or competency that they're looking for. And then you can have group interviews where you have a number of candidates in the room at the same time, and each candidate is being interviewed by multiple people, or they can be what's called a fishbowl interview, where maybe a number of panelists are watching all of the candidates together talking about a particular situation or talking about a particular question. And then stress interviews, which are not done all that often anymore, are used for to figure out what a particular candidate can do around stress, how much stress that they can handle in a particular role. So that is all interviews. You'll definitely want to know about behaviorally based interviews. There's usually a question about that. Typically, I don't say a question about the other ones, but it'll be important to know about that one. Next week, we'll go into assessing and evaluating and then offering positions, and then we'll move into the next section, which is employee engagement and retention. But I want to stop a few minutes before 8 to make sure see if we can answer any questions for anyone.
So is this going to be available in 24 hours?
It is. So I'm going to send you, Wendy will post the recording, and she'll post the slideshow for you. And then I will send you in an email tonight before I leave my office the key concepts and some quizzes to take both on talent acquisition and on HR strategy. And then I'll send you the answer sheet, the answer key for the one that I sent last week.
Is the talent acquisition available on the Eckerd website?
Will be. Yep, it will be tomorrow.
And on the books, how do I follow along with the books?
So in your book, I go almost slide by slide, except there's so many slides I can't really follow every single one. But you should, if you go to talent acquisition, you should be able to follow where I am as I'm going through them. But the other thing that I would recommend for all of you is you get on that learning system and start taking some of those assessments.
Yeah.
Because the quizzes in the middle really help to bring everything we talk about to life.
I just didn't know which book to start with.
The people. It's the people.
Yes. So if you look at the top right corner of the books, it'll say this one's in people, and it'll tell you exactly. It'll say HR strategic planning, talent acquisition, employee engagement, and then you can find exactly what section we're covering.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
The title slide of every one of my presentations will be exactly like whatever the section is in your book. Oh,
okay. I'm like trying to write as fast as I can.
You'll have all the information in there, but
okay,
depending on your learning style, which we'll talk about next week, in the next couple of weeks, you may need to write it down first. I get it.
Okay.
One of the things that I want to really quickly just offer to you all is I will happily schedule a couple more sessions that we could do maybe another night, maybe just for an hour, 6 to 7, a couple different times over the course of the next 12 weeks where I can just quiz you. We can play games. I'll do some of those in class as we can, but where you can learn some of the material and have it kind of hone in on some of the material based on just doing some quizzes and some learning games, if that would be of interest to you.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So what
Yes.
I'll do is I will put some available days, and then I'll give Wendy some available dates, and then you guys can just come. You know, we'll use the same login, and you can just come if you can or not, and we'll have as many of those as you all think will be necessary.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. So next week we're going to talk about employee engagement. We might even get to learning and development, and we'll finish up this one. There's just about 20 more slides on this one, and most of them are quiz questions for you. So we'll do all of that next week, and be looking for both an email from me with some of the materials, as well as everything posted from Wendy on that website.
Perfect.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right,
Great
thank you.
week, and we'll talk next Monday.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.